This morning we have Dane Lin on my left, who is the Executive Director of the Education Division of the National Governors Association. He directs research and policy analysis, technical assistance, and resource development for the NGA. Dane is a national expert on the areas of K-12 education, including high schools, education technology, teaching, and accountability. He has served as an elementary school teacher, principal, and was a coordinator of West Virginia Department of Education's Office of Special Education Programs. To Dane's left is Doug Levin, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the National Association of State Boards of Education, which represents each of the nation's state boards of education. He has more than 17 years' experience in education policy and research. Part of that experience includes working at AIR, and it's wonderful to see our alumni succeed, where he served as principal research analyst on a variety of important projects. Before joining NASB, he was Senior Director of Education Policy at Cable in the Classroom, the cable industry's National Education Foundation. Mitch Chester, who will be joining us by phone, is the Commissioner of Education in Massachusetts. He took over the office just over a year ago and pledged to take schools in the state from good to great. He began his career as an elementary school teacher and moved on to assume leadership roles in the Connecticut Department of Education, Philadelphia Public School, and the Philadelphia Public Schools. Prior to his current position, he was Associate State Superintendent for Policy and Accountability in Ohio. And Mitch will be joining us shortly. So, with no further ado, I'm going to let the panelists begin their comments. And Dane, will you go first?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I'd like to be the Executive Director of the Center for Best Practices, but I'm just the Director of the Education Division at NGA. Always important that you go back to the office and your boss doesn't ask you if you took his job. So, would never pretend to do that. Thank you for having me here this morning. I just want to make a couple of comments in response to the report and the relationship between the findings in this report to the work that NGA currently has underway in partnership with the ACT, the College Board, and Governor Romer from Colorado, who's with the College Board now, is with us this morning, as well as Achieve, who are our partners in the endeavor to create a set of common standards, common core standards that are developed or led by the states and can be internationally benchmarked. I think a couple of points that I want to raise in the time that I have with you this morning is when I read the report and reread it on the early flight back up from North Carolina this morning, one thing hit me, and that was the word accelerate. And we don't have the time to conduct, and we have all the analyses we need to accelerate this agenda, to accelerate an agenda that allows us to focus on how we regain our status in this world relative to student performance. We don't have time to waste in trying to help the students in the United States perform comparable or better yet at the top of those charts, some of those charts that Gary has shown us. Is particularly concerning to us when you look at the OECD average that we're either at the middle of the pack or we're below the pack for some specific states. And it's important because OECD countries represent 90% of the world economy. And for us, or for my constituency, governors, that matters a great deal. That we need to be competitive with those countries, not the third world countries. We need to be competitive with the countries in this world that are growing not just in numbers, but growing relative to student performance. So in our minds, as we do this work, even average is not good enough. We need to be at the top of those charts. And that's going to take really hard work. It's going to take a lot of political will, and it's going to take money. It's going to take investments to enable us to help students meet those higher standards. Because setting the bar higher alone isn't enough. We need the resources for teachers, we need the resources for parents, we need the resources for students to help support them so that they can reach the higher bar that we're setting. So as you hear more and more about the NGA work in particular around developing a common core set of standards, we're not solely focused on the standards themselves. Quite frankly, I get a little frustrated that we've spent 25 years trying to perfect the standards. We've had enough time to perfect the standards. It's time to use the evidence we have, and this report provides that type of reinforcement, the type of evidence we need to inform, at least in part, the development of the work that we have currently underway. It's really time to get to the most important part, and that's the outputs, the performance. Because if we can't adequately measure performance against a high standard, we'll always be trying to play catch up. My other comment includes, and this is partially addressed in the report we issued in December '09 on international benchmarking, called Benchmarking for Success. Part of what this report doesn't show us, but I think is important that we not lose sight of it, is the equity agenda. We have huge equity gaps in this country. We have equity gaps in my home state, which is largely a white population. We have equity gaps in New Mexico. We have equity gaps all over this country. So setting the bar alone without addressing how we close that gap for the minority that's becoming the majority in this country is a critical issue that we're going to have to face. Again, particularly as we move to the implementation of the Common Core standards. I came up from North Carolina this morning because we've been meeting for 2 days with the governors. We have 22 or 23 governors who spent 2 days with us, and the secretary spent all day with us yesterday as well, Secretary Duncan, talking about the issues around internationally benchmarked standards and how we raise the quality of teaching, how we provide the supports that we need for students to meet those standards. And we're fortunate that he's put some money on the table, $350 million, to help states develop the assessments to align to those standards. We're not sure how much it's going to cost, but we'd like to think there's an economies of scale here. To think that we're spending approximately $700 million a year collectively on student assessments in this climate particularly is probably not a good use of money. There's a better way to spend the money, and I think that's one of the issues that came up yesterday. Some governors have requests for proposals out on creating a whole new battery of assessments. They're now going to put the brakes on now that the secretary has put that money on the table. And their reason for putting the brakes on their own investments is because there's an economies of scale here that we can reach through the standards and the assessments. The last point I would make, two last points. One is, yes, this is complex, but it's doable. We have great research from AIR, from states, and we have great research from states like Massachusetts and Minnesota, who perform relatively well on these international assessments. So let's use that research to inform the acceleration of our own work. And the last is, sometimes our work has been guided, our work, meaning the states, has been guided on what we think works best. We have evidence. This report clearly provides the evidence we need. We need to use the evidence to inform our decisions. From a political point of view, there's not enough money in the bank to be developing policy on anecdotes or what we think works best for kids. And again, there's not enough time. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague from NASB and look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Dane. First off, I'd like to offer my congratulations to Saul, to Gary, and to their colleagues at AIR on a job well done. Today, more than ever, it's so very important to ensure that research is relevant, timely, and targeted to key decision makers that have both the authority and the responsibility to act on that information. This is important work, and we applaud and welcome the scholarly contribution. I also want to extend my thanks to Dane Lynn and to Mitch Chester for their extraordinary leadership and for their longstanding support and engagement with both NASB and state boards. For those who are not familiar with my organization, we do serve and represent state boards of education around the country. State boards are found in 48 states, as well as D.C., Guam, Northern Marianas, and Puerto Rico. And while the responsibilities for state boards vary from state to state, there are some common areas of jurisdiction. I think it's important to lay this out. They are responsible for setting statewide standards, for establishing high school graduation requirements, for establishing state testing and assessment programs, for determining the qualifications for education professionals, including teacher and administrator preparation programs, for establishing standards for the accreditation of local districts, and in many states, they select and evaluate the chief state school officer. So NASB and its members, we recognize the need for and are supportive of the voluntary development of college and career-ready standards that are fewer, higher, and clearer in mathematics and English language arts. We believe strongly the need for these standards to be forward-leaning and set expectations for the nation's children that will allow them to succeed not in 1950, 1970, or even 1990, but that will set them up for success in 2020 and beyond. Now, success in this common standards endeavor will be hollow if we also cannot measure up to the best in the world. Indeed, it is painfully evident that the world in which we live is smaller and more interconnected, socially, economically, politically, and changing at a greater pace than ever before in human history. No school, district, or state can operate in isolation. This is a moral imperative in that a high-quality education is a civil right. It's a civic imperative in that a highly educated citizenry is required to navigate public issues as they become more complex. And it's an economic imperative in maintaining the U.S. position in the world economy. I think the AIR study is a timely contribution in support of this effort, and itself is a proof of concept for actionable international benchmarking of student performance. Indeed, much has been written and discussed about how technically we could or should benchmark our performance, in what subject, against what performance standard, against which countries, and much of what Dr. Phillips has done in this study foresaw those concerns and addressed them, at least insofar as is possible today. I think for those of us who are interested and engaged in educational improvement, the timing of the release of the study is quite remarkable and I think quite helpful. At a time of fiscal stress, I think there's an impulse to hunker down and maintain the status quo. And as the AR report reminds us, the status quo is not good enough. The report demonstrates one of the reasons that we know this to be true, that other countries are preparing their children better than we are, at least in the critical discipline of mathematics. And I know that many are encouraged and hopeful, as we are, in being able to benchmark U.S. Student performance so clearly, and the implications of that for the direction that we are collectively moving in developing common state standards. And I think there is good reason for optimism, but I also think there is reason for caution and humility in the face of the task at hand. And the primary reason I say this is that the open, inclusive, voluntary adoption of common state standards, while certainly important and a non-trivial step in and of itself, and I think in this respect I'm agreeing with Dane's statement, it just represents really only one step in a coordinated process to realign and upgrade the practice of teaching and learning in classrooms of math and English language arts. And so while I fear that the way forward is clear, that it will be harder and fraught with more difficulties than we yet understand, and certainly developing high-quality assessments, instructional materials that reflect those standards, rethinking teacher recruitment, development, and evaluation, and designing interventions and fostering innovations to better serve those ill-served by our current educational system, all are critical and necessary steps on the road to success. And I think we need to not set those to the side as we work through the standards issue. State boards of ed have been and are and will continue to be engaged in this work. And we applaud and support, we applaud the support of the U.S. Department of Education in recognizing the need for both federal leadership and support to help us with the heavy lifting ahead. We are hopeful that this represents a new era of state-federal partnership in K-12 education, which moves beyond a one-size-fits-all approach to an approach that is encouraging of state innovation to meet shared national goals, coupled with accountability for results. So thank you, and I look forward to your comments and questions.